Good morning, students. Today, let us study about the spinal nerves. In the previous class, we have studied about the spinal cord, the anatomy, physiology, and the internal organization of the spinal cord. Today, let us see about the spinal nerves. So, what are spinal nerves? Spinal nerves and the nerves that branch from them are part of the peripheral nervous system. So, there are many nerves. We have seen 31 pairs of spinal nerves are branching out of the spinal cord. So, the spinal nerve and the branches of them are called as the peripheral nervous system. They innervate the peripheral parts of the body. So they connect the central nervous system to the sensory receptors, muscles, and glands in all parts of the body. So that is their main role. So they make a communication, they make a connection between the different parts of the body and the central nervous system. So they connect the central nervous system to the sensory receptors, muscles, and the glands in all parts of the body. So as we have seen, there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, and they are named and numbered according to the region and the level of the vertebral column from which they come out, emerge. So not all spinal cord segments are aligned with their corresponding vertebrae. The spinal cord ends near the level of the superior border of the second lumbar vertebrae. So we have seen in the previous class, the spinal cord is not complete. Okay, it will end near the second lumbar vertebrae, and that the roots of the lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal nerve descend at an angle to reach their respective foramina before emerging from the spinal cord. So this is called as a horse tail like arrangement, and then you would have studied about this. This arrangement constitutes the chorda equina, horse tail. So this we have seen, there are the spinal cord and the spinal nerves. So they are called as plexus. So you can see cervical plexus C1 to C5, and you have brachial plexus C5 to T1. Then you have the thoracic nerves. Okay, it is called as plexus. And you can see the lumbar plexus. You can see the lumbar nerves here, sacral plexus L4 to S4, and these are the plexus and the nerves, different pairs of nerves. The first cervical pair of spinal nerves emerge between the occipital bone and the atlas. So that is the cervical pair. The first cervical pair of the spinal nerve emerge between the occipital bone and the first cervical vertebrae. Most of the remaining spinal nerves emerge from the vertebral column through the intervertebral foramina or the opening between the adjoining vertebrae. So spinal nerves C1 to C7 exit the vertebral canal above their corresponding vertebrae. This is how they come out as segment by segment. So spinal nerve C8 exits the vertebral canal between the vertebra C7 and T1. Spinal nerves T1 to L5 exit the vertebral canal below their corresponding vertebrae. From the spinal cord, the root of the sacral spine nerves S1 to S5 and the coccygeal spinal nerves CO1 enter the sacral canal, that is the part of the vertebral canal in the sacrum. Spinal nerves S1 to S4 exit the sacral canal via the four pairs of anterior and posterior sacral foramina. And spinal nerve S5 and coccygeal nerve CO1 exit the sacral canal via the sacral hiatus. So these are the different foramens or the openings through which the spinal nerves are coming out of the spinal cord. So we have seen the internal anatomy of the spinal cord, the organization of the gray matter and the white matter, and we have studied clearly about the position of the gray matter inside and the position of the white matter out on the outer side, and we have studied about the fissure, anterior fissure, and the posterior sulcus, okay, which goes inside, and you would have studied about the anterior white column, posterior white column, lateral white columns, and also about the gray, that is the gray horn, anterior gray horn, posterior gray horn, okay, lateral gray horns, and about the roots and the rootlets. So we have studied about the posterior root of the spinal nerve. It contains the ganglion, and also the anterior root of the this one, okay, anterior, this is called as the ventral root of the spinal nerve, this is called as the dorsal root. And we have seen about the cell body, presence of cell body of the sensory neurons. Okay, they are entering from the site, from the sensory receptors through the posterior nerves, and then the message is passed on to the central nervous system, and the motor neuron will send the message, okay, through the gray horn, and they will come out through the anterior, this one, okay, anterior root. These are the root and these are the rootlets. The both the posterior and the anterior roots merge together to form a nerve. So this is the nerve. So we have seen about the structure of the spinal cord in the previous class. A typical spinal nerve has two connections to the cord. So as we have seen, it is a posterior root and an anterior root. The posterior and anterior root unite to form a spinal nerve at the intervertebral foramen or the intervertebral opening. So because the posterior root contains sensory axons and the anterior root contains motor axons, what is the spinal nerve classified as? It is classified as a mixed nerve. So the posterior root contains a posterior root ganglion in which the cell bodies of the sensory neurons are located. So let us study about the connective tissue coverings of the spinal nerves. Each spinal nerve and cranial nerve consist of many individual axons and contains layers of protective connective tissue coverings. So we have seen about this in the previous meninges, the skull and the cerebrospinal fluid. So here also the spinal nerves are protected, contains many layers of protective connective tissue just like the muscles. So individual axons within a nerve, we will see in the next slide, whether it is myelinated or unmyelinated, are wrapped in endoneurium. So this is the innermost layer, that is the endoneurium, innermost layer of the nerve which is covering the axon, whether it is myelinated or unmyelinated. So groups of axons with their endoneurium covering are arranged in bundles. Okay, you would have recalled this name called fascicles in the muscles also. Each of the fascicles is wrapped in perineurium, which is the middle layer. Then all these are covered by the outermost covering over the entire nerve, which is called as the epineurium. This is the outermost covering. So extension of the epineurium also occurs between the fascicles. The dura mater of the spinal meninges fuses with the epineurium. So you would have studied about dura mater, arachnoid matter, and the pia mater. So the dura mater of the spinal meninges fuses with the epineurium as the nerve passes through the intervertebral foramen. So you can see many blood vessels, okay, in this region which nourish the nerves within the perineurium and the epineurium. There is also connective tissue coverings of the skeleton. That is the skeletal muscles you would have studied about endomysium, perimysium, epimysium. Okay, so these are the similar terms used here also for the coverings of the spinal nerve. That is the endoneurium, perineurium, and the outermost epineurium. So here you can see the structures. So you can see different organization of the spinal nerve, the connective tissue covering of the spinal nerve. Here you can see the individual axons. Okay, individual axons. They are covered by the innermost endoneurium, which covers the each and every axon. So the axons can be either myelinated or unmyelinated. So here you can see on the a bundle, many number of axons are grouped together to form a fascicle. This is completely covered by perineurium. You can see many fascicles coming out of the spinal nerve. Okay, the outermost covering is called as the epineurium, which covers the entire spinal nerve. Okay, which is composed of the bundles, nerve bundles. And you can see many blood vessels here, blue color and red color blood vessels are also present in the connective tissue. So this is the transverse section of the nerve fascicle. You can see many axons. Okay, the endoneurium, perineurium, you can see the blood vessels and the epineurium. So this is how it is made up of, the coverings. Now let us see the distribution of spinal nerves. So we will see the branches. What are the branches? A short distance after passing through its intervertebral foramen, a spinal nerve divides into several branches. So that is the ramus. Okay, we would have studied ramus in other in muscles also. So these branches are called as rami, okay, or ramus, singular ramus. So the dorsal one, it is called as a posterior ramus. It supplies the deep muscles and the skin of the posterior surface of the trunk. Okay, the posterior ramus supplies the deep muscles and skin of the posterior surface of the trunk. Similarly, you have the anterior or the ventral ramus, which serves the muscles and the structures of the upper and lower limbs and the skin of the lateral and anterior surfaces of the trunk. So, apart from the posterior and the anterior ramus, there is another one. Spinal nerve also gives off a meningeal branch. This meningeal branch re-enters the vertebral cavity through the intervertebral foramen and supplies the vertebrae, vertebral ligaments, blood vessels of the spinal cord, and the meninges. So, this also have to be supplied by the nervous system. So, other branches of the spinal nerve are the rami communicantes. Okay, these are the components of the autonomic nervous system. So we will see about this here. You can see the ramus. This is the posterior or the dorsal ramus, and this is the anterior or the ventral ramus. And you would have seen about, studied about the denticulate ligament. This is the meningeal branch. So these are the spaces, subarachnoid space filled with the CSF. This is the body of the vertebrae. Okay, this is the posterior side and this is the anterior side. This is the spinous process of the vertebrae, muscles, spinal cord. Okay, these are the posterior and the root or and the posterior ganglion can be seen here. These are the rami communicantes. The rami communicantes, these are the sympathetic ganglion of the sympathetic trunk, and dura mater, arachnoid matter, and epidural space is also shown here. So again, this is the structure showing the denticulate ligament, dura mater, arachnoid matter, spinal nerve, the posterior and the anterior root, and the ramus. Okay, ramus. These are the into which the nerves are emerging. So there is another term called as plexus. So very important. The axons from the anterior rami of spinal cord, except the thoracic nerves T2 and T12 to T12, do not go directly to the body they supply. Instead, they form network on both the left and right sides of the body by joining with the number of axons from the anterior rami of adjacent nerves. So these kind of network of axon is called a plexus. So this is the plexus. The name is, it is a network of axons. Okay, it is called as a braid or network. The principal plexuses are the cervical plexus, brachial plexus, lumbar plexus, and sacral plexus. There is another one smaller one called as the coccygeal plexus also. So, emerging from the plexus are nerves bearing names that are often descriptive of the general regions they serve or the course they take. So, these are the main plexus from which many smaller branches also arise. Each of the nerves in turn may have several branches named for specific structure they innervate. So there is another one called as the intercostal nerves. So from the name itself, you can understand about the intercostal nerves. The anterior rami of spinal nerves T2 to T12 do not enter in the formation of plexus. Okay, they do not form the plexus. So they are called as the intercostal or the thoracic nerves. These nerves directly connect to the structures they supply in the intercostal spaces. So this will leave the intervertebral foramen, and after it leaves that, the anterior ramus of that nerve T2 innervates the intercostal muscles of the second intercostal space. I hope you understand what is the intercostal muscle and the intercostal space of the ribs, and supplies the skin of the axilla and the posteromedial aspect of the arm. Then from T3 to T6, the nerve extend along the costal grooves of the ribs and then to the intercostal muscles and the skin of the anterior and the lateral chest wall. The nerves T7 to T12 supply the intercostal muscles and the abdominal muscles along with the overlying skin. So the posterior ramus, what does it do of the intercostal nerve? Supply the deep back muscles and skin of the posterior aspect of the thorax. So these are the intercostal nerves. So you can see these are the plexus. As I told you, cervical plexus, brachial plexus, lumbar plexus, sacral plexus. So we will see about them one by one. What are cervical plexus? So cervical plexus is formed by the roots of the first four cervical nerves. Okay, so it is formed by the roots of the first four cervical nerves C1 to C4 with contributions from C5. So there is a pair, there is one on each side of the neck alongside the first four cervical vertebrae. So what does it supply? It will, the cervical plexus supplies the skin and muscles of the head, neck and superior part of the shoulders and the chest, upper part of the body. The phrenic nerves arise from the cervical plexus and supply motor fibers to the diaphragm. So branches of the cervical plexus also run parallel to two cranial nerves. The accessory nerve, that is the 11th nerve, and the hypoglossal 12th nerve. You can see from the figure, you can see the cervical plexus supplies the skin and muscles of the head, neck, superior portion, upper portion of the shoulders and the chest, and also the diaphragm. So these are the different branches. You can see the hypoglossal or the 12th cranial nerve, and you can see the lesser occipital, greater auricular, transverse cervical, superior root of the ansa cervicalis, inferior root of the ansa cervicalis, supraclavicular, phrenic nerve. Okay, these are the C1, C2, C3, C4, and C5. Okay, so these are the branches. These are the yellow colored ones are the roots, and blue colored ones are the nerves. So what is a lesser occipital nerve? Okay, where it is distributed. So you can see it is a C2, origin is C2. It is distributed in the skin of the scalp posterior and superior to the ear. Whereas great auricular, it is distributed to the skin, that is anterior, inferior and over ear and over parotid glands. Then you have the transverse cervical. Okay, it supplies the skin over anterior aspect of the neck. Supraclavicular supplies the skin over superior portion of the chest and the shoulder. These are the superficial nerves, whereas the deep branches of the nerves are ansa cervicalis, okay, phrenic and the segmental branches. So the ansa cervicalis, you have the superior and the inferior root. They are divided into in superior and inferior root. They supply the infrahyoid and the geniohyoid muscles of the neck. Okay, phrenic nerves supply the diaphragm. Segmental branches, they are the prevertebral muscle of the neck, levator scapulae, and the middle scalene muscles. The next one is the brachial plexus. Okay, brachial plexus. So the roots of this spinal nerve C5 to C8 and T1 from the brachial plexus extend inferiorly and laterally on either side of the last four cervical and the first thoracic vertebrae, the C5, C6, C7, C8, and the T1. So it passes above the first rib, posterior to the clavicle, and enters the axilla. So, like the cervical and other plexus, roots are the anterior rami of the spinal nerves. So, the roots of the several spinal nerves unite to form trunks in the inferior part of the neck. So, there are superior, middle, and inferior trunks. Okay, posterior behind the clavicles, the trunk divided into divisions called the anterior and the posterior divisions. So in the axillae, the divisions unite to form cords, and the lateral, called as the lateral, medial, and posterior cords. So the cords are named for the relationship to the axillary artery, a large artery that supplies blood to the upper limb. The principal nerve of the brachial plexus branch from these cords. Okay, where do this the brachial plexus supply? It provides almost the entire nerve supply of the shoulders and the upper limbs. So there are five important nerves which arise from the brachial plexus. What are they? First one is the axillary nerve supplies the deltoid and the teres muscle, minor muscles. The musculocutaneous nerve supplies the anterior muscles of the arm. The radial nerve supply the muscles on the posterior aspect of the arm and forearm. The median nerve supplies most of the muscles of the anterior forearm and some of the muscles of the hand. The ulnar, you could have heard about this name, ulnar, radius ulna. Ulnar nerve supplies the anteromedial muscles of the forearm and most of the muscles of the hand. So you can see the different muscles here. You can see the roots, trunk, anterior division, posterior division, cords and branches given in different color. Okay, so the main supply of the brachial plexus is to the shoulder and the upper limbs. So you can see the various branches: dorsal scapular, superior trunk, middle trunk, inferior trunk. Okay, these are the three trunks. Then you can see the nerve supplying the subclavial, scapular, lateral pectoral, lateral cord, Okay, axillary, median, and radial. Okay, ulnar. So these are the five branches. Okay, see, these are the origins of the thing. The red colored ones are called as the branches. So we'll move on to the next one. So these are the places where it is distributed. So then different nerves supplying the brachial branches of the brachial nerve are dorsal scapular, long thoracic, subclavius, suprascapular, musculocutaneous, lateral pectoral, upper subscapular, thoracodorsal, lower subscapular, axillary, median, radial, medial pectoral, medial cutaneous nerve of the arm, medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm, ulna. So they supply the various regions of the shoulder and the hand and the muscles. So these are the exact thing they are showing how the nerve supply is taking place from the C5, C6, C7, and C8. Four nerves from the cervical region and T1. Okay, so how do they supply the shoulder and the arms? Okay, you can see the lateral pectoral nerve here, lateral cord, posterior cord, axillary nerve, medial cord. You can see the long thoracic nerve, medial pectoral, medial brachial cutaneous, medial antebrachial cutaneous, radial nerve, median nerve, and the ulna, radius ulna. Okay, so these are the superficial and the long nerves of the brachial system. Next, we will move on to the lumbar plexus. Okay, the roots of the, that is the anterior rami of the spinal nerves L1 to L4 form the lumbar plexus, lumbar region. So unlike the brachial plexus, there is minimal intermingling of fibers in the lumbar plexus. There is not much branching. On either side of the first four lumbar vertebrae, lumbar plexus passes obliquely outward between the superficial and deep heads of the psoas major muscle and anterior to the quadratus lumborum muscle. So it then gives rise to the peripheral nerves. The lumbar plexus supplies the anterolateral abdominal wall, external genitals, and parts of the lower limbs. That is what we are going to see. See from here, T12, L1, L2, L3, L4, L5. So these are the roots. Okay, and these are the anterior divisions. Light green color and the dark green color shows the posterior divisions. So it supplies the anterolateral abdominal wall, external genitals, and parts of the lower limb. So you can see iliohypogastric, ilioinguinal, genitofemoral, okay, lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh, femoral nerve. Okay, this is the accessory obturator, and this is the obturator. These are the origins of the lumbar plexus. So you can even see the lower limbs, the hip bone, sacrum, obturator nerve, pudendal nerve, femoral nerve, sciatic nerve. So sciatic nerve, as you can see, this is the longest nerve of the legs. Okay, tibial nerve, common fibular nerve. These are the fibula, tibia, femur, superficial fibular nerve, deep fibular nerve, tibial nerve, medial plantar nerve, and the lateral plantar nerve. These are the different nerve supply of the lumbar. So these are the names. You can go through this. Iliohypogastric nerve supplies the anterolateral abdominal wall, skin of the inferior abdomen and the buttock. Ilioinguinal, they supply the abdominal wall, thigh, penis, scrotum, labia majora, and mons pubis in the female. Genitofemoral, it supplies the cremaster muscle, skin over the middle and anterior surface of the thigh, scrotum in male, and labia majora in the female. Lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh, they supply the skin over the lateral, anterior, and posterior aspects of the thigh. Femoral, this supplies the largest nerve arising from the lumbar plexus. So it goes to the flexor muscle of the hip joint and extensor muscle of the knee joint, skin over anterior and medial aspect of the thigh and the medial side of the leg and foot. Then you have the obturator. So they supply the adductor muscle of the hip joint, skin over medial aspect of the thigh. Next, we'll move on to the sacral and the coccygeal plexus. So the root of the anterior rami, the root of the spinal nerve, that is the L4 to L5 and S1 to S4, form the sacral plexus. So this plexus is situated largely anterior to the sacrum. Okay, sacrum. So the sacral plexus supplies the buttocks, the perineum, and the lower limbs. So the largest nerve in the body is called as the sciatic nerve, arises from the sacral plexus. The anterior root of the spinal nerve S4 and S4 to S5 and the coccygeal nerve from the small coccygeal plexus supply a small area of the skin in the coccygeal region. Okay, so these are the different nerves, sacral plexus supplying the buttocks, perineum, and the lower limbs. You can see the L4, L5, then S1, S2, S3, S4, S5. So these are the regions from which the segments are coming out. Okay, you can see the root, the anterior division, and the posterior division. Okay, so it is supplying the femoral nerve, lumbosacral trunk, superior gluteal, inferior gluteal, piriformis, tibial, common fibular, sciatic. Okay, sciatic, which is the longest nerve. So you would have heard about the sciatic problem. Okay, so now to quadratus femoris and the inferior gemellus. So these are the other nerves. This is the pudendal nerve, perforating cutaneous, posterior cutaneous nerve of the thigh. These are the coccipital nerve and the anococcygeal nerve. Coccygeal nerve. Okay. Similarly, you can find many names like the superior gluteal, as we have seen, inferior gluteal, nerve to piriformis, nerve to quadratus femoris, inferior gemellus. Okay, many names are given here. Perforating cutaneous, posterior cutaneous nerve of thigh, sciatic nerve, tibial nerve, medial plantar, lateral plantar, common fibular, deep fibular, and the pudendal nerve. Which is, you can go through this. Okay, supply the different regions of the lower part of the body. What are dermatomes? Okay, the skin over the entire body is supplied by somatic sensory the neurons that carry nerve impulse from the skin to the spinal cord and the brain. Okay, so what happens? This each spinal nerve contains sensory neurons that serve a specific segment of the body. So this particular trigeminal fifth nerve, the cranial fifth cranial nerve, serves most of the skin of the face and the scalp. So this area of the skin that provides sensory input to the central nervous system via one pair of spinal nerve of the trigeminal nerve is called as the dermatome. Okay, derma means skin and tome means thin segment. Okay, so the thin segment that provides the area of the skin that is a sensory input to the central nervous system. So what happens? This is very important for the therapeutic purpose and so many other cosmetology purpose. So the nervous supply in adjacent dermatosome overlaps. Somewhat it overlaps. So by understanding the spinal cord segment supply of the dermatome, okay, it is able to we can locate the damaged regions of the spinal cord, okay, to which it responds. If the skin in a particular region is stimulated by the but the sensation is not understood, okay, then you can see that there is a damage. Okay, the nerves supplying the dermatome are damaged. That is why they are not able to feel the sensation even if it is stimulated. So there is maybe that place will become numb. In regions where the overlap is considerable, little loss of sensation may result if only one of the nerves supplying the dermatome is damaged. So this is very important. The study of the dermatome and information about the innervation pattern of the spinal nerves are very important for understanding the damage, and it is very useful for therapeutic purpose. So cutting posterior roots or infusing local anesthesia can block pain either permanently or transiently. So this is what is called as a dermatome. You can see this is the trigeminal fifth nerve is given as an example. A dermatome is an area of the skin that provides sensory input to the sensory central nervous system via the posterior root of one pair of spinal nerve or via the trigeminal nerves. This is called as the dermatomes. Okay, so today we have studied about the different types of uh, spinal nerves. That is the you would have seen about the cervical plexus, brachial plexus, lumbar plexus, sacral plexus, and so on. In the next class, we will study about the physiology of the spinal cord. Thank you.